The snow falls in silence on the northern wastes, each flake a whisper of forgetting. Ilara walks barefoot across the frozen ground, her thin dress torn at the hem, her breath forming small clouds that dissolve into the darkness. Behind her, the torches of the pack fade into memory. They had called her weak. They had called her cursed. But the truth is simpler. She had flinched when the Alpha King commanded the hunt under the full moon, and flinching in a world of wolves is treason. The pack had gathered in the great hall, their eyes bright with bloodlust and the call of transformation. Ilara had stood at the edge, her Omega body refusing the shift, her hands trembling as the change took hold of those around her. The Alpha King, Kyle, had watched her from his throne of bone and silver, his expression carved from ice. When she could not complete the transformation, when her human form remained defiant and weak, he had laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "An Omega who fears the moon," he had said, his voice echoing through the stone chamber. "A creature too fragile for her own nature. Cast her out. Let the wilderness decide what we cannot." They had dragged her to the edge of the northern cliffs at dusk, and at moonrise they had simply let her fall. Now, hours later, she kneels in the snow beside a frozen stream, her body numb, her fingers purple with cold. Above her, the moon hangs full and merciless, and she can feel its pull like hooks in her chest, a summons she cannot answer, a belonging she cannot claim. The rejection burns deeper than any physical wound. She is Omega in a world that demands strength, and she has been found wanting. A sound breaks the silence, a growl, deep and resonant, cutting through the wind like a blade. Ilara's breath catches. She does not turn. In the old stories, when the wolves came to finish what the pack had started, there was no point in running. But the growl softens, becomes almost questioning. Through the veil of snow, a shadow emerges, massive, lupine, silver fur matted with what might be blood, his own or others, she cannot tell. The wolf's eyes are amber, catching the moonlight, and they lock onto hers with an intensity that steals her breath entirely. This is no common beast. This is an alpha, transformed and wounded, moving through the winter as though the cold itself parts before him. He circles her slowly, and she remains motionless, waiting for the mercy of teeth and darkness. Instead, he shifts. The transformation is violent and beautiful, bone and sinew rearranging, fur receding, leaving behind a man of terrible proportions, tall, scarred. His bare chest rises and falls with exertion, and there is blood across his collarbone, fresh enough to steam in the frozen air. His face is sharp, angular, marked by a long scar that runs from his left temple to his jaw. When he looks at her, those amber eyes do not soften, but something in them shifts, recognition, perhaps, or hunger of a different kind. "Another castaway," he says, his voice rough as gravel. "How fortunate that the wolves and I share the same taste in refuse." Ilara cannot move, cannot speak. She only watches as he steps closer, his naked body unmarked by cold, his power radiating like heat from a dying fire. "What is your name, little Omega?" She whispers it. "Ilara." "Ilara," he repeats, tasting the word. And who had the audacity to throw away something so expendable? "The Alpha King," she says, and her voice does not break. "Kale of the Northern Throne." The scarred man goes very still. The moonlight catches the lines of his face, and in that moment, Ilara sees something like anguish cross his features, swift and terrible, like lightning through stone. "Kyle," he says softly. Then, with more weight, "I am Kyle." The world stops. The Alpha King himself stands before her, cast out and bleeding, as alone in the snow as she is. And for the first time since they threw her from the cliff, Ilara understands that exile is not always a solitary fate. Sometimes it is shared. Sometimes it is the beginning of something that neither the moon nor the gods intended. He reaches down to her, his scarred hand opening like a question. "Come," he says. "The night is not finished with us yet." Kyle's refuge is a cave carved into the mountainside, hidden behind a cascade of frozen waterfall that looks like shattered glass. Inside, a fire burns, not the hot, consuming blaze of destruction, but something older, more primal. Moonstone and silver ore line the walls, and they catch the firelight, casting it back in 1,000 fractured images. It is beautiful and terrible, like being inside a dream made of light and sorrow. Ilara sits near the fire, wrapped in furs that smell of pine and wood smoke, and something wild she cannot name. Her feet are bandaged with strips of cloth, dipped in something that burns and soothes in equal measure. Kale has said nothing since bringing her here. He sits across the fire, his back against the cave wall, his scarred jaw tight, his amber eyes fixed on the flames as though they might offer him answers. "Why did you take me with you?" Ilara asks finally. Her voice is small in the vastness of the cave. "You could have left me to die. It would have been cleaner." "Perhaps I should have," Kyle says, and the words are not cruel. They are simply factual, the way one might observe that snow is cold. It would have been mercy in its way. But I have found that Mercy and I are no longer on speaking terms. He is quiet for a long moment, and when he speaks again, his voice carries the weight of old guilt, worn smooth by time and repetition. 3 months ago, I ordered the execution of an innocent pack, a smaller clan to the east. They had been accused of poaching sacred hunting grounds, of disrespecting the moon's dominion. I believed the accusers. I was eager to prove my strength, my ruthlessness. He pauses, running a hand across his scarred face. 37 wolves died on my command. 37. It was only later that I learned the truth. My own lieutenant had fabricated the accusations to remove rivals. By then, the blood was in the snow, and no amount of remorse could wash it clean. Ilara watches him, seeing the man beneath the legend. An alpha, for all his power, is still capable of breaking. Still capable of carrying wounds that cannot be healed by teeth or claws or transformation. "So you ran," she says. "I ran," he confirms. "I became exiled from my own throne because I could not bear to sit upon it. The guilt was a crown heavier than any I had worn." He finally looks at her, and his gaze is searching. "And then I found you. An omega cast out for being weak, when perhaps weakness is the only honest thing left in our world." Ilara wants to argue, wants to defend herself. But the truth sits between them like a third presence, and she cannot deny it. She is weak. She cannot shift fully under the moon's call. She cannot hunt, cannot fight, cannot be the creature her nature demands. "I mocked you," Kale says quietly. "In the hall, when you could not transform, I made you a jest for the pack to enjoy, and then I had you cast out as though you were nothing." He leans forward, and the firelight catches the intensity in his eyes. "Your weakness exposed my tyranny. That is why I threw you away." The admission hangs in the air between them, and Ilara feels something crystallize in her chest. Not forgiveness. She is not yet capable of that. But recognition. They are both broken, both exiled, both carrying the weight of a world that demands perfection and offers only judgment. "Why tell me this?" she asks. "Because," Kyle says, "a man who seeks redemption must first be honest about the weight of his sins. And I think perhaps you are meant to witness my confession. Not to absolve me, I do not deserve that, but to see me as I truly am. Broken, guilty, and still, somehow, bound to this moment with you." Ilara stands, moving toward the cave entrance. The waterfall glows with moonlight, and beyond it, she can see the night sky, vast and uncaring. The moon hangs there still, that merciless orb that calls to her in a language she cannot speak, in a voice that promises nothing but more pain. "I cannot help you," she says, not turning to face him. "I cannot be what you need. A vessel for your redemption, a way to balance the scales. I am exactly what they said I was. I am nothing." "You are not nothing," Kyle says, and his voice carries a strange certainty. "You are the only one who did not fear me enough to hide your truth. In a world of predators, you alone refuse to pretend." Ilara turns back to him, and in that moment, something shifts in the firelight. A mark appears on her skin, faint, like a brand written in silver. It forms on her collarbone, spreading like frost across glass. A crescent moon, pale and luminous, visible only in the fire's glow. Both of them stare at it. "What is that?" Ilara whispers. Kale stands slowly, approaching her with reverence rather than hunger. He reaches toward the mark, and when his scarred fingers touch it, both of them feel the contact like lightning, painful, electric, true. "That," he says, "is the moon claiming what was always hers to claim. That is destiny asserting itself over exile." And in the cave of stone and silver, surrounded by the dying heat of a fire that has witnessed centuries of pain, they stand on the threshold of something neither of them understands. The night is not finished with them, not even close. Days blur into nights in the cave. Ilara learns the rhythms of this place, how the fire must be fed with specific wood to keep the silver ore warm, how the waterfall's frozen exterior conceals an entrance that only the knowing can navigate, how Kyle moves through the space with the careful precision of someone who has mapped every shadow and stone. She also learns that Kyle does not sleep. On the fourth night, she finds him standing at the mouth of the cave, watching the moon's progression across the sky with an intensity that borders on obsession. His scarred face is illuminated by the pale light, and she sees what she did not notice before. He is not simply marked by violence, he is marked by purpose. The scar that runs from his temple to his jaw is too deliberate, too exact. It is not an accident of battle. "You did that to yourself?" she says, understanding suddenly. Kyle does not turn. "After the executions, a penance carved into flesh. Some alphas wear their guilt in silence. I chose to wear it visibly. A reminder, every time I look in still water, of what I am capable of." Ilara moves to stand beside him. The night air touches her skin, cold and alive, and she feels the strange pull again, that call from the moon that her body cannot answer. But tonight, something is different. The crescent mark on her collarbone burns, not with pain, but with recognition, as though the moon is drawing closer, acknowledging her in a language that predates words. "The mark is spreading," Kyle observes. He is right. The silver crescent has extended further across her shoulder, and new marks are forming, threads of lunar script, ancient and incomprehensible, writing themselves across her skin like a map of prophecy. "What is happening to me?" Ilara asks, and her voice carries no fear now, only wonder. "You are being claimed by something older than the pack," Kyle says. "The Pathfinder gift. It manifests rarely, and when it does, it chooses those the world has rejected. Those who have walked alone through the darkness and emerged not with bitterness, but with the capacity to guide others through it. Ilara has heard whispers of Pathfinders in the old stories, Omegas born once in generations, marked by the goddess herself, capable of sensing the threads of fate that bind all things. They were said to be rare, precious, and dangerous, because a creature who could see the paths forward could also see the paths that led to destruction. "I don't want this," Ilara says, but even as the words leave her mouth, she knows they are a lie. She does want this. For the first time since they threw her from the cliff, she wants something with a hunger that matches the moon's own hunger. "The gift does not ask for consent," Kyle says. It simply chooses its vessel and begins its work. A sound echoes through the mountains then, not the howl of wolves, but something else. Something larger, older. Multiple voices singing in a harmony that makes the stones themselves vibrate. Kyle tenses, his body shifting instinctively toward the predator that lives beneath his skin. "Hunters," he says quietly. "They have tracked me from the capital. My nephew, perhaps. He would want to kill me himself, to take the throne and erase the stain of my failure." Alara feels it then. A pulling sensation, like invisible threads tightening around her heart. The Pathfinder mark flares bright, and suddenly she sees, not with her eyes, but with something deeper. She sees the threads of fate that bind all things, the hunters approaching through the snow, yes, but also the paths between them, the ways forward, the choices that will determine whether Kale and she live or die in the next hours. And she sees something else, a choice point, a moment where the story could fracture into 1,000 different endings. "They're coming through the eastern pass," she says, and her voice carries absolute certainty. "They will arrive before dawn. There are 9 of them, all transformed, all hungry for blood." She pauses, feeling the paths shift and branch. "But there is another way. If we leave now, if we go north into the old temple ruins, we can reach the sanctuary before they cut off our escape." "The sanctuary is myth," Kale says. "A place from the stories told to children." "No," Alara says, and she knows this with the bone-deep certainty that comes from the Pathfinder gift. "It is real, and it is protected by the goddess herself. They cannot follow us there. Nothing violent can enter that place." Kyle looks at her, this small, broken Omega who was cast out for being weak, and he sees something he did not expect. Strength. Not the strength of teeth and claws and transformation, but the strength of sight. The strength of knowing. The strength of prophecy. "Then we run," he says. And for the first time, his voice carries not the weight of a fallen king, but the hope of a man who has been given a second chance. They move quickly through the cave, gathering what little they have. As they pass the fire, Alara reaches down and touches the flames. They respond to her touch as though she has always been their keeper, burning brighter, hotter, with a light that seems almost aware. The silver ore in the walls catches this light and amplifies it, creating a beacon that will blaze through the night. Behind them, as they slip through the waterfall and begin their flight northward through the snow, that beacon burns like a promise, or a warning, perhaps both. The moon, high and full above the mountains, seems to lean toward them as they run, the Omega girl whose fear has become power, and the Alpha King whose guilt has become the soil from which redemption might grow. If you are watching from somewhere in this world, we invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments below. Tell us where you are and the exact hour this story found you. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel and at what moments of the night they reach you. Your voice matters. Your presence counts. The sanctuary does not announce itself. It simply exists as though it has always been waiting for exactly this moment, for an Omega with sight and an Alpha King with remorse to find their way to its threshold. The temple rises from the snow like a memory made stone. Its walls are pale marble veined with silver, and there are no guards, no weapons, no marks of violence. Instead, there are mirrors, hundreds of them, set into every surface, reflecting the moonlight and the starlight and the essence of those who enter. They do not reflect what is, but what might be, what could be, what should be. Alara steps through the great arched doorway first, and when she does, the mirrors show her something that makes her breath catch. She sees herself not as broken, not as weak, but as a vessel of light. The crescent moon mark blazing across her skin like a constellation, and behind her, threads of silver extending infinitely in all directions, connecting all things, showing her the hidden architecture of fate itself. Behind her, she hears Kale gasp. When she turns, she sees him reflected in 1,000 mirrors, and in each one, he is different. In some, he wears the crown of the northern throne, his face proud and unblemished. In others, he is a monster, his scar bleeding endlessly, his eyes black with the sin of the innocent he executed. In still others, he is something beyond both king and monster. He is a man, simply bearing the weight of his choices with the dignity of one who has chosen to face them rather than hide. "What is this place?" Kale whispers. "The House of Mirrors," a voice says, and both of them turn. A woman stands in the center of the great hall, tall, ageless, her robes the color of starlight and deep water. Her eyes are silver, exactly like the Pathfinder marks on Ilara's skin. Where the goddess shows us not who we are, but who we must choose to become. The woman moves toward them with a grace that suggests she has no weight, no substance, as though she is made of intention rather than flesh. She circles Ilara slowly, and the Pathfinder mark on the girl's skin blazes brighter. "The gift awakens," the woman says, and there is satisfaction in her voice. "A true Pathfinder, born to see the threads, born to guide. You understand now why the pack rejected you? Because they feared what you might see if you looked too closely at the paths they had chosen." "Who are you?" Ilara asks. "I am the Keeper," the woman says, "the guardian of this threshold. I have waited lifetimes for a Pathfinder to come, and I have waited even longer for an Alpha King to arrive, broken enough, guilty enough, aware enough to stand in the presence of truth without flinching." She turns to Kale, and her silver eyes fix upon his scarred face with intensity. "You executed innocence," she says, "and it is not an accusation, but a statement of fact. 37 souls, and the blood of their families on your hands. You thought your scar would be penance enough. You thought exile would balance the scales. But scales require intention, Kale of the North. They require the conscious choice to become something other than what you were." "I know," Coyle says, and his voice is steady. "I have carried that knowledge like a stone in my chest since the day I understood my error. There is no redemption that can undo what I have done. I do not ask for forgiveness." "Good," the Keeper says, "because forgiveness is not mine to give. It belongs only to those you wronged, and they are beyond your reach now, scattered into the darkness." She pauses, and when she speaks again, her voice carries the weight of prophecy. "But redemption, true redemption, is possible. Not through penance or guilt or exile, but through transformation, through becoming a man who would never make the same choice again, no matter the pressure, no matter the cost." The Keeper turns back to Ilara. "And you, small one, you who were rejected for being weak. Do you understand what your weakness was truly? It was not inability, it was refusal. Your body would not complete the transformation because some deeper part of you understood that the hunt under that moon, in that moment, would lead to darkness. Your weakness was wisdom. Your fear was sight." Ilara feels something crack open inside her chest, a cage she did not know she was in, suddenly falling away. All her life, she had been taught that fear and refusal were failures. But the Keeper is saying something radical, that they might have been the truest strength she possessed. "The hunters are very close now," the Keeper says. "They will reach the temple in moments. In this place, they cannot enter. The sanctuary rejects violence. But you have a choice to make, both of you. You can remain here, safe and hidden, and the world outside will eventually forget you. Your story will end in silence." The Keeper gestures toward one of the mirrors, and it shows a vision. Ilara and Kyle, aged and peaceful, existing in the margins of the world, untouched and unchanging. Or you can walk back out into the night, face what comes, and risk everything in the hope of transformation. Ilara looks at Kale, and he looks at her. And in that moment, they both understand that they have already made their choice. Not to hide, not to accept the margins, but to step back into the world and attempt something radical, to transform the narrative of exile into a narrative of return, not as the same creatures they were, but as something new. "We choose the storm," Alara says. "We choose the fight," Kale says. The keeper smiles, and it is a smile of profound understanding. She raises her hand, and the mirrors around them shift, showing now not alternate versions of their futures, but a single path, bright and terrible and beautiful. A path that leads through pain towards something that might, if they are very brave, become grace. They emerge from the sanctuary as the first light of false dawn touches the eastern sky. The hunters are waiting, 9 transformed alphas, their fur bristling with electricity, their eyes burning with the hunger to kill. At the center of them stands Vitar, Kale's nephew, his body massive and dark, his transformation so complete that his human face is barely visible beneath the predator's mask. "Uncle," Vitar growls, his voice distorted by the shift, "you have run far enough. The throne demands your death, and I am here to provide it." Kyle steps forward, his body beginning to shift, his scar becoming more pronounced as the transformation takes hold. But it is not a transformation meant for battle. It is something else, something the hunters have never seen before. His form becomes luminous, the silver in his blood rising to the surface, marking him not as a predator, but as something touched by the divine. Alara stands behind him, and she can see, truly see, the fate that is unfolding. She sees the paths where Kale dies, torn apart by the weight of 9 alphas. She sees the paths where he kills Vitar and claims the throne again, only to become the tyrant that guilt has taught him to fear. She sees the paths where they all die, the threads of their lives cut short by violence. But she also sees another path, a thin one, barely visible, requiring perfect choices made in perfect sequence, a path where truth becomes the weapon. "Stop!" she cries out, and her voice carries the weight of prophecy. The Pathfinder marks on her skin blaze so brightly that all the hunters are forced to shield their eyes. "Vitar, you came to kill the man you believed was a tyrant, but I show you what you have been lied to about." She raises her hand, and in the snow before them, images form, not visions born of magic, but memories. The memories of those who were executed on Kale's orders, preserved somehow in the threads of fate itself. They appear like ghosts, like echoes, like the truth that has been waiting to be witnessed. And among them is a figure that makes Vitar go absolutely still, an old man, scarred and noble, with Vitar's own eyes. "Your father," Alara says quietly, "who was the true architect of those executions, who lied to his brother the king and set him on the path of guilt and exile, who sent you here to clean up the evidence by killing the one man in the kingdom who was finally ready to tell the truth." The moment stretches like pulled glass. The hunters wait for Vitar to respond, to deny, to charge forward and silence the Omega girl who speaks prophecies. But Vitar is frozen, looking at his father's ghost, at the terrible complexity of his own family's sins laid bare in the snow. Kyle could kill him now. In this moment of vulnerability, with transformation half complete and the nephew's focus shattered, Kyle could end Vitar's life and reclaim the throne. But he doesn't. Instead, Kyle completes his transformation into his full human form, naked and scarred and absolutely vulnerable. And he kneels. "Your father used me," Kyle says, his voice carrying across the frozen wasteland. "He used my hunger to prove strength, my arrogance, my need to be feared. And I allowed him to use me because I wanted to believe that a king must be ruthless. I was wrong. And in that wrongness, innocent blood fell. I cannot undo that. But I can choose, in this moment, to be something other than a tyrant." He looks up at the hunters, at Vitar, at Alara standing radiant with prophecy behind him. I release my claim to the throne, Kale says. Let the kingdom choose its next ruler from those who were never stained by my uncle's manipulations. Let this be the beginning of something new, a leadership born not from the right of the strongest, but from the choice of the people. A wind rises then, sweeping down from the mountains, and it carries with it the sound of distant bells, ancient bells, the kind that ring only when the world shifts on its axis. The hunters begin to shift back to human form, confusion and understanding warring across their faces. Vitar, still kneeling beside the ghost of his father, looks up at Kale with tears streaming down his face. I was sent to kill you, he says, his voice breaking, by my own father, believing I was serving the kingdom. And now you know the truth, Kale says gently. What will you choose to do with it? The hunters who came seeking blood become instead witnesses to truth. They return to the capital, carrying news that splits the kingdom in two. Some loyal to the old way of kings and conquest, others drawn to the radical possibility that redemption might be real, that guilt could be transformed into grace, that weakness might be the truest strength of all. In the weeks that follow, Vitar becomes the architect of change. His revelation of his father's crimes tears apart the foundations of the old power structure, and in the vacuum, something new begins to grow. Not a kingdom ruled by an iron-fisted king, but a federation of packs, each choosing their own path, each guided by principles rather than fear. And Ilara, the Omega who was cast out for being weak, becomes the pathfinder that prophecy promised. Her gift matures, the silver marks on her skin spreading until her entire body is a map of fate itself, visible only when the moon is full. She walks between packs, sensing the threads that bind them, showing them the paths forward and the paths that lead to ruin. She is not a leader, not a ruler, but something more essential. She is a witness to the possible. Kale does not return to the throne. Instead, he becomes something else, a scholar of guilt, a teacher of redemption. He writes in a great library, documenting the nature of his crimes and the slow, difficult process of learning to live with them rather than trying to escape them. His scar remains visible, not as a badge of penance, but as a permanent reminder that transformation is not about forgetting who you were, but about becoming intentional about who you choose to be. But in the nights, when the moon is full and the hunters howl in the distance, he and Ilara meet in the old temple where it all began. They do not need words. The pathfinder marks on her skin and the scar on his face carry all the communication necessary. They are witnesses to each other's becoming. They are the proof that even in a world of predators and prey, something as radical as grace can take root. One night, as they stand together watching the moon, Kale takes Ilara's hand. The moment they touch, the silver marks on her skin flare bright, and for just an instant they can see the threads of all possible futures branching from this moment. In some, they remain as they are, forever between states, neither quite bonded nor separate. In others, they choose to bind themselves to each other, not through the traditional claiming that wolves practice, but through a new kind of bond born of choice and understanding and the acceptance of each other's brokenness. I love you, Kyle says, and the words carry the weight of prophecy. Not because you are my redemption, not because you were born to heal me, but because you chose to see me as I truly am, and you did not turn away. Ilara looks at him, and in the moonlight, her pathfinder marks cast shadows that look like wings. I love you, she says, because you chose exile rather than tyranny, because you kneeled rather than killed, because you understood that the greatest strength a king can possess is the courage to step away from the throne. They do not complete a formal bonding. Instead, they simply remain, hand in hand, as the night deepens around them and the future branches into infinities of possibility. Somewhere in those infinite paths, there is redemption. True redemption. Not the kind that erases guilt, but the kind that transforms it into wisdom. The kind that takes a broken king and a rejected omega and makes them into something neither predator nor prey, but something altogether new. The moon watches, the stars bear witness, and in the far distance the wolves begin to sing, not a hunting song, not a war cry, but something that sounds almost like hope. Subscribe if you believe mercy can crown even the fallen. Comment Luna if you'd walk through the storm for someone who saw your worth. Like if you believe rejection can become destiny. Months pass, and the changes ripple outward like waves across the frozen lakes of the north. The kingdom that once relied on a single iron-fisted ruler begins to organize itself differently. There are councils now, gatherings of alphas and omegas, and even the rare, neutral souls who exist between the hierarchies. Ilara is not asked to rule, the Pathfinder gift rejects such singular authority, but she is consulted when the councils reach impasses. She sees the threads. She shows them the consequences of their choices. It is during one such council that the true nature of her gift reveals itself. A dispute has arisen between two packs over hunting territory. Both sides present arguments that are valid, both claim ancestral rights, and both are prepared to go to war over the matter. The council is deadlocked, unable to find a path through the complexity of competing legitimate grievances. Ilara enters the chamber, and as she does, the silver marks on her skin begin to glow. She does not speak at first. Instead, she walks to the center of the gathering, and when she moves, it is as though she is tracing something invisible in the air. The Pathfinder marks leave trails of light, and in those trails, everyone present can see it. Not the future, but the depths, the hidden history. They see the two packs' ancestors, centuries before, making a mutual choice to share the territory rather than divide it. They see the treaties written on leather that have been lost to time. They see the misunderstandings that have accrued across generations, small misinterpretations compounding into the present conflict. The answer is not in the law, Ilara says, and her voice carries harmonics that seem to come from very far away. It is in the memory. Both packs have the right to this land because both were meant to share it. Not in the way of compromise, where each gives up something, but in the way of symbiosis, where each becomes stronger through the presence of the other. She looks directly at the alpha of the first pack. You need the eastern hunting grounds for winter elk. The other pack does not. She turns to the second alpha. But you need the northern slopes for the silver fox. The first pack has never hunted there. She pauses, letting the understanding settle. Separate your hunts by season. Let the need of one pack become the gift of another. This is not the language of kings. This is the language of survival. Within moments, the conflict dissolves, not because Ilara has commanded it, but because she has revealed a truth so simple, so natural, that both sides wonder why they did not see it themselves. The councils begin to ask for her counsel more regularly, not as a ruler, but as a voice that speaks the language of interconnection. Kale watches this transformation with something that might be awe. He sees the girl he found dying in the snow become a woman who walks between worlds, her feet touching the boundaries between fates, her words carrying the weight of prophecy without the burden of authority. But he also sees the cost. Each time Ilara uses her gift deeply, each time she sees far into the threads of possibility, something in her changes. The Pathfinder marks spread further across her skin until her entire body is a map of silver and shadow. She becomes less solid, more luminous. Sometimes, when she stands in certain kinds of light, she seems almost transparent, as though she is gradually becoming less a creature of flesh and more a creature of pure sight. One night, after a particularly demanding council session, Ilara comes to Kale's chambers looking exhausted in a way that is more than physical. "I'm changing," she says simply. "I can feel it. The gift is consuming the woman who carries it." Kale pulls her close, and they stand together in the darkness, holding on to what they are while understanding that transformation, true transformation, requires that they cannot hold on forever. "Is it painful?" he asks. "No," Ilara says. "It's beautiful, it's terrifying, but it's not painful." She looks up at him, and he can see in her eyes the infinite regress of future sight, as though she is looking not at him, but through him to all the versions of him that might exist. "I've seen what I'm becoming, Kyle. I've seen the end of this path." "And?" he asks, and his voice is steady, even though his heart is breaking a little, with the knowledge that he is losing her to something greater than death. "And I'm ready," Ilara says, "but I wanted to know, before I go fully into the sight, before I become a creature more of vision than flesh, I wanted to know what it feels like to be loved by you, truly loved, not as a pathfinder or a healer or a redemption, but as a woman who is simply Ilara." Kyle answers her not with words, but with the most human thing he possesses, his hands, his breath, his heartbeat, the physical proof that he is still a creature of flesh and feeling despite the scar that marks him. They come together not as Alpha and Omega, not as king and healer, but as two souls who chose each other in the darkness and have been learning ever since what it means to be chosen. And above them, the moon watches with infinite patience, understanding that this too is part of the pattern, that love and loss and transformation are all threads in the same great weaving. A year passes. The kingdom continues its slow evolution into something that has no clear name in the old languages. There are now 5 distinct packs, each with their own councils, each guided by the principles of symbiosis rather than dominance. Peace is fragile, but it is real, and at its heart stands a woman who is no longer quite woman, no longer quite wolf, but something altogether new. Ilara has become fully the Pathfinder. Her body is luminous now, visible as a creature of silver light rather than flesh, her footprints leaving trails of starlight on frozen ground. She does not eat or sleep in the traditional sense. Instead, she exists in a state of perpetual seeing, her consciousness stretched across the threads of all possible futures, her presence a constant reminder that the world is far more connected and complex than the simple hierarchies of predator and prey. The wolves call her the Queen of the Northern Dark, not because she has claimed a throne, but because she has become the night itself, the sky itself, the fundamental force that holds the balance between chaos and order. Kale has aged in the way that men with deep guilt age, more within than without, his scar becoming less visible as his understanding deepens. He has become something like a priestess's consort, a keeper of the memory of who Ilara was when she was a girl who feared the moon. He writes her story down, documenting the journey from exile to transcendence, creating a record that future generations might understand the meaning of what she has become. On the winter solstice, the darkest night of the year, Ilara returns to a more solid state for the first time in months. Her luminous form gathers density, substance, solidity, until she appears almost entirely human again. It is only for a few hours, a window of manifestation that becomes briefer and briefer with each passing season. Kyle waits for her in the great hall of the temple, alone except for the mirrors that have been kept exactly as they were on the night they first sought sanctuary. Ilara enters, and in the silver reflections he can see all the versions of her that she has been. The terrified girl cast from the cliff, the refugee in the cave, the prophet in the sanctuary, the counselor in the halls of the councils, and finally this, something that moves between all states, belonging fully to none. "Hello," she says, and her voice carries echoes of countless futures and pasts layered over each other. "Hello," Kale replies, and his voice is just a man's voice, simple, grounded, real. "They want to make me a goddess," Ilara says, and there is something almost like humor in her layered tone. "The Pax, they see my transformation and they want to worship it, to make it sacred and distant. Will you let them? Kale asks. No, Alara says, because I learned something in becoming the Pathfinder. Divinity is not about distance. It is not about being untouchable or elevated. It is about being so fully present in your own transformation that you become a mirror in which others can see their own capacity to change. She moves closer to him, and when she touches his scarred face, the contact is warm and real, despite her increasingly otherworldly nature. I came back one more time, she says, to tell you thank you, for finding me in the snow, for seeing me when I was nothing but rejected flesh, for choosing redemption instead of revenge, for teaching me that a man broken enough to kneel is stronger than any king who stands alone. Kyle feels tears on his face, but they are not tears of sorrow. They are tears of understanding, the understanding that some people come into our lives not to stay forever, but to teach us how to love without possession, how to let go of those we cherish most. What happens to you now? He asks. I become the road, Alara says, the threads that connect all things, the voice that speaks to those who are lost, showing them the paths that lead forward. I become what I was always meant to be, not a creature, but a function of the universe itself. I become the mercy that exists between moments. She begins to fade then, her form becoming luminous again, the silver marks on her skin spreading until she is entirely light. But before she disappears completely, she takes his hand one final time. Find someone new to love, she says. Someone solid, someone who will not transcend you. Live a human life, Kyle. You have earned it. I will, he promises, and means it. She releases his hand, and as she does, her form explodes into 1,000 points of light, not destructive, but radiant. The light spreads through the temple, through the mountains, across the frozen lands of the north, and everyone who witnesses it understands, in that moment, what it means to be guided by something greater than themselves. And then, she is gone. Not dead. No, she is too fundamental, too woven into the fabric of things to die. She is simply elsewhere, everywhere. The spaces between choices, the silence between heartbeats, the whisper of wind that tells the lost which path to follow. Kale stands alone in the great hall, surrounded by mirrors, and for the first time since his exile began, he allows himself to grieve not with guilt, but with love. The distinction matters. In grief born of love, there is not self-recrimination, but gratitude. There is not regret, but completion. He picks up his pen and writes, in the book that he has been keeping, these final words about the girl who became a queen. She feared the moon, and it made her its choice. She was rejected by the world, and so she became the world's guide. She was nothing, and she became everything. And in the space between those two extremes, she taught me that redemption is not about erasing who we were, but about becoming intentional about who we choose to be. She was Alara. She is Alara. And she will always be the light that finds those who are lost in the dark. Outside, the snow begins to fall again. Each flake a message, each gust of wind a voice saying, the paths forward are many. The choice is yours. But you are never alone in the choosing. And somewhere in the silver space between night and day, between what was and what will be, a pathfinder smiles. If your heart beat alongside ours, if you felt the weight of that redemption, if you understood that mercy can crown even the fallen and that rejection can become destiny, like, comment, and subscribe. Because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive. Every witness to this story becomes part of the greater tapestry, and in the darkness, we are never truly alone. This is Moonblood Chronicles. We will meet you again in the night.